Charleston County Coroner's Office is expanding its offices to better meet the needs of this community. Today, I talk one-on-one with Charleston County Coroner Bobbi Joe O'Neill for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and like Quintin's Close-Ups on Facebook. Charleston County Coroner Bobbi Joe O'Neill. Welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups, sponsored by the Pepper Law Firm, PA.
Very good. Well, thank you for having me, Quintin. It's good to talk to you again.
Oh, I appreciate it greatly. Needless to say, you have been Charleston County Coroner since 2021, or January of 2021. And tell me, as we sit here right now, Coroner, what's new, what's now with the Charleston County Coroner's Office?
Oh, man. It's really been a great first term, Quintin, and we've done some really amazing work at the Charleston County Coroner's Office. First and foremost, we just continue to take care of our citizens and visitors. That's primary. But the way we do that improves because medical legal death investigation has become more scientific. It's become more technical. It's become more costly. And honestly, it's become more public. The public is more aware. So right now, probably the big thing is we are expanding the office. So I worked with county council to expand with the growth of the county, and we really needed to have some more space. And that gave me an opportunity to bring in some really amazing forensic equipment that's not available anywhere else in the state. And so that will be up and running hopefully right after the first of the year. So hopefully that helps us take care of families better, answer more questions for decedents and those who can't speak for themselves.
Let me go back because obviously you just mentioned about expanding your particular coroner's office. So how much money did you get from Charleston County Council to be able to do that?
Well, they actually got it from ARPA funds. So
Right.
It didn't come from taxpayer dollars. It actually came from the COVID money.
Right.
And I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure what the dollar figure was. But what we are doing is expanding the facility to add additional morgue space. And it will change the flow of the operations. So as some may remember, we used to always do our autopsies at the medical university, and we've started to do those in-house. And the reason is because we are a big enough county to handle our own. And so the other thing that happened with council is I got approval to hire our own forensic pathologist. And Dr. Williams, he actually started just last week. So we've gotten him settled. And that's a really good thing because when we can do everything inside our own space, we control the evidence, we control chain of custody. We're able to have families come to us if they need something. It just better serves everyone. And county council was really great to work with because they understood that. We were having some pretty bad delays in getting answers for families. And this is cutting that down from sometimes 5 and 6 to 7 days down to 24 and 48 hours. And that's a really amazing thing as we take care of families.
Now, before you hired, obviously, the forensic pathologist and all of these other things that you just mentioned, how many other delays did you all have within the coroner's office?
Yeah. Well, sometimes we would have a delay in autopsies, and that was a matter of getting those scheduled. But the other big delay that we fixed during my term was how quickly we get toxicology results. So usually we would send off a sample to a lab, and it could take us 6 to 8 weeks to get results back. And so we got grant funding for a rapid toxicology analyzer that now gives us qualitative results within an hour. So we're able to quickly assess somebody, provide information back to families, provide information to our community. So our Charleston Center, who provides resources and where to send Narcan into communities to prevent deaths. And then it also provides information to law enforcement who is trying to figure out where the drugs are and how do we stop them. And so that has been a game changer as far as decreasing the amount of time that we are waiting on information to make decisions. And so that's been huge. We're the first in the state to get that. And I've helped a couple other counties now get some funding so they can do that as well.
Now, until those particular counties get that funding, how many of those counties are actually utilizing the Charleston County's resource for what you have?
Yeah, so right now, Lancaster County brings all of theirs to Charleston, and then we've helped a few counties as they need it. So Darlington County has come our way. Berkeley County has sent cases our direction. The other thing we did just this past year is really a regional project with Beaufort County. So Beaufort County also has an autopsy facility. And what we did is we worked really closely together to make sure both offices had the same equipment, We're using the same case management system so we could talk the same language. And we really have set our offices up that if one of us should get taken out by a hurricane, for example, and we've got that going on right now, that we could still operate and use each other's facilities. And that is a great project between Charleston County Coroner's Office and Charleston County Council, honestly, and Beaufort County Coroner's Office and Beaufort County Council. Their administrations, we've worked beautifully together. And so now we're equipped. If my office gets knocked out by a hurricane, I still have to do the job. I still have to take care of decedents. I still have to take care of families. And now I have a resource in Beaufort County, and the same for them. If Beaufort County should have a problem, they can come and we can help them take care of everyone. And that's just great mass fatality planning, and it's just great regionalization as we help each other.
What other mass casualty resources do you have now as a result of COVID and obviously hurricanes?
Yeah. So as a state, we actually started what's called a MAST team, which is a mortuary assistance strike team. But as far as equipment, we've gotten a number of refrigerated mortuary trailers in case we need them. And I will tell you, with Hurricane Helene, there's been some requests that we may need to issue those. We've had about 35 deaths in South Carolina that I'm aware of right now. I'm sure that's going to go higher. Yeah. The other thing that we got funding for, I worked really closely again with Greenville County and Spartanburg County, and we went together to get a rapid DNA unit. And so this is really an amazing piece of equipment that does a matching of familial DNA. So if we suspect someone and we think we know who they are, and we think we know who their family is, we could take a sample from each, and that machine will tell us whether there's a familial connection. This was the same unit that was used in Maui during the fires in Maui, and also in a number of the incidences out in California where they had fires. We hope we never have to use it in a mass situation, but I can tell you that we are ready. I am also anticipating we may get some requests for North Carolina to maybe use that after Hurricane Helene.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. Now, and I just reported this, but posted an article about it on X just a few minutes ago before coming over here. But that number you mentioned, 35, is obviously accurate. Do you know if that is coming from the Low Country or is that mostly in the upstate?
Yeah, most of those deaths right now are in the upstate. Where I'm seeing, so as president of the South Carolina Coroner Association, the coroners around the state, when they have a fatality that's related to a storm, they report that to me, and then I report that to the governor's office. And so what we're mostly seeing is trees falling on homes, and then individuals are not able to get out of those homes. We have had a couple of incidences where individuals are on like home oxygen and there's no electricity, and therefore they succumb to their medical problems because they can't get medical treatment. And so we consider those storm related as well. But most of them are up in Aiken, Greenville, Spartanburg. We've had a few in Anderson, a couple in Chester. They're sort of scattered, but sort of all over that upstate with those big trees.
Yeah, and it's really Augusta's being impacted a lot, and as you just mentioned, Greenville, Spartanburg, even Western North Carolina.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this: with that new autopsy system that you all have right now, how much more autopsies can you actually produce now?
Well, it has to do with our forensic pathologists and the number of cases that they can do. So there's actually national standards.
Okay.
So the national standard is for pathologists to do between 250 and 325 autopsies. That's where we really should keep them in order for them to be doing a quality job, being able to testify, all of those things. So in Charleston County last year, we reached about 700 autopsies. So that means just in Charleston County, I would need 2 forensic pathologists full-time to be able just to handle Charleston County. And so again, County Council gave me both positions. I'm still trying to fill that other position. Right. But we also have contractors who come in and help us. And so those would be able to take on cases from those other cases. The forensic pathologist employee will only be doing Charleston County. That's dedicated to us. We're first. That's my responsibilities, Charleston County. Yeah. But we are glad to provide that resource because every coroner's office doesn't need an autopsy facility. What they need is access, and they need access to timely services. And so that's what we're able to help provide to them.
Now, how many more contractors do you have to take on those other cases?
Yeah. Well, I have, as far as contractors, we currently have two forensic pathologists who live in the area who do
Okay.
cases for us. And then I have a physician she lives in Florida and she's come up for the week to do some cases. Charleston County and the coroner's office, we're recognized nationally. We have forensic pathologists who have come from around the country who want to come and work with us for a week or two. And that's really great to have those relationships, and that way we keep those time, waiting down as best as we can here for our citizens.
Absolutely. And earlier you talked about obviously Narcan and the number of Narcan use resources that you all are giving out to keep the number of obviously deaths going down there. So exactly what is the Charleston County Coroner's Office doing now to keep that number down?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked. Coroner's offices, we impact the criminal justice system, but we also impact the public health system greatly. And so during my term, I actually created a position for an epidemiologist to track all of our numbers, because one of the best things we can do is provide accurate data. If we don't have accurate data, then that impacts how we all respond. But then on top of that, we actually became a distributor for Narcan. The coroner's office has become a Narcan distributor. And so we are going to community events and providing information. But when we're at a death scene of someone where we suspect that they probably have a toxicity of some kind, we are leaving Narcan behind for families, for their friends, in the hopes that they also don't just succumb to that. My hope as coroner is that we can save them. I don't want them to come to the coroner's office, because if they do, then all hope is lost. But if we can give out Narcan and try to save a life, that is a wonderful thing.
How many Narcans have you actually distributed?
Oh, hundreds. I'm not even certain. Hundreds and hundreds. We've actually spoken at a number of groups. I've been to a couple of the senior centers in town, and even talked about not just Narcan, but how to secure prescription bottles. There are really nifty contraptions that have locks on the top of them. So for grandparents who may have grandchildren around and they have risks, and really it's about awareness. I think a lot of the population, they hear about it. They hear about the opioid problem and they don't really think it involves them. And when they start to realize that it actually does, and that they can do something should they experience someone who's in Walmart and has an event in the bathroom and somebody's got Narcan and can save them, or wherever it may be, they have an opportunity to really help us save somebody.
Yes, ma'am. And I want to get back to that in just a second. But speaking of which, obviously your job, well, your job as coroner is to deal with, fatalities and whatnot. So how many deaths this past year were actually by suicide?
Oh, I think I don't know the number off the top of my head, but we tend to average somewhere around between 50 and 70 over the past couple of years. We had an up spike in COVID. During that time, we had an up spike in suicide deaths and also overdoses. I think some of that's come down a little bit. Where we're seeing probably issues is in our veteran population. And so we've been working with the VA hospital. They've got some programs where they're trying to do some suicide awareness prevention programs. And one thing we can do is when we have the death of, for example, a veteran, we can review that with them and provide information of what we learned. Were they getting services or were they not? Or did they fall through the cracks somewhere? Those kind of things, in hopes that maybe they can create a system that can help those veterans who need help, and other populations as well. That's just one specific one.
And how many of those suicides were actually by veterans in Charleston County?
Oh, again, I don't know that number off the top of my head, Quintin. Most of our stats are actually on our website, and we try to update those every 2 weeks and as best we can. One of the things with the epidemiologists we're hoping to do is to create a real-time dashboard on our website with data. And, we get requests all the time for data. Sometimes it takes us a while if we're waiting on the toxicology results or an autopsy result. But there are things that we can create and can provide, and would save a lot of time for my folks who are looking at numbers a lot. And it really helps our stakeholders. People are trying to figure out how to make decisions about the community, or law enforcement or nonprofits are trying to figure out, what population group do we need to target. And that kind of a dashboard would really provide information to them. So that's one of the hopes going into the hopefully a new term, is that we'll be able to get that kicked off and available to everyone.
So, what population needs to be targeted right now by your office?
For suicides,
Yeah.
well, the biggest thing we're seeing right now is not suicide related, is the opioid epidemic. I would say, the numbers from 2021 to 2022 to 23, we were rising hugely. And every one of those, when we look at what the substance is, nearly 80% of all of our drug overdoses or toxicities have fentanyl in them. That's by far our biggest number, is our opioid deaths. That is a huge problem. Now, we also have opioid or drug related deaths that are not accidents, they're suicides. And so that doesn't fall into those numbers when we're looking at an unintentional drug overdose or toxicity. As far as suicide specifically, honestly, the biggest group that we see is sort of folks your and my age. Those who are in their 40s and 50s, and something's going wrong. Something's gone wrong financially, or something's going wrong medically, and they just have a sense of no hope. And so I would say that's a target group that I don't think folks realize. They think it's a young population. They think it's our young folks that are committing suicide, and we have some of those. But most of the time, they're middle aged and they're going through some sort of crisis.
Wow. And obviously, with social media and other things going on these days, what exactly are those trends that are leading people to suicide?
Well, I think coming through COVID, everyone was isolated. I mean, that was the first problem, and then we had all these financial problems, and so people lost jobs or couldn't get jobs. But from my perspective, they lost relationship. When you are working remotely all the time, yes, you're on Zoom, just like you and I are today, but it's not the same. It's not the same as having relationship. And so we have a lot of folks that I think do not have relationship. And so they're alone, or they feel like they're alone.
Jesus, sorry to hear that. Well, let me ask you this. Well, how many of those deaths were unintentional suicides this past year?
I think this past year, I think our number was like 286, I believe, for 2023, excuse me. And we're now in 2024, and we're on target to probably surpass that.
How do you compare that from 4, 5, or 10 years ago?
Yeah, it's constantly risen. Every year, our number has risen. Part of that is population. I mean, obviously, our population's higher, so our numbers are higher. But we're also just seeing a different strain of drug. So when I first started in the coroner's office back in '98, we would have a drug overdose, but it was from one substance. It was they died of a cocaine overdose, or they had a heroin overdose. Today, it is a mixture of all sorts of substances, and I'm not even sure that our community oftentimes knows what they're taking. Things are mixed, whether they know it's mixed or not, and so it's just more deadly. It's also stronger, but that's been a huge change just in my career. Noticing a difference in what those toxicology results look like. It's no longer that we see one drug in a toxicology report. It's very unusual.
What else is sticking out in your mind that surprises you about those particular toxicology reports?
I'm surprised at the range of individuals. It is young folks, it is older folks, it is in every community. I think that's what startles me, is that it's not even like we can target prevention in one community. It's in all of them. Which is heartbreaking. The other thing we've had the past couple of years is we started to see where it was taking individual in twos. We had a number of situations where we had two brothers who died at the same time. We had two sisters who died at the exact same time. We had a boyfriend and a girlfriend. And so it's not taking us just individually, it's taking us collectively, because it's such a risk. And that's why Narcan and having prevention is so important, and sort of teaching about what the signs and symptoms are, what to look for somebody who's potentially overdosing.
What are those other risks right now that you're seeing from a trending standpoint?
For the individuals?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. I think just the risky behavior of thinking that it's not going to impact them. I think we all sort of have that thought that I see it on television and I see it in the news, but that's somebody else. or that's somebody else's family. And I think there's some denial. I've had other reporters ask me, like, the opioid epidemic's in the news all the time. What are we doing wrong? We're trying to get the word out.
Right.
And I think it's just denial. I think people just don't think it's going to hit them.
Wow. What else are these people, the young people, from your coroner's office perspective, are actually in denial of?
Oh, I think they don't realize that life is short, and that sometimes consequences are permanent, and young folks don't know that. As we go and talk sometimes to young folk groups, whether it's schools or groups, sort of showing with them what we see, and that their decisions and things that they make have permanent consequences, and they impact a lot of people, that not just them, but the people that love them.
Wow. And from a growth standpoint, Coroner, what else has impacted your office over the past 4 years?
Yeah. I mean, obviously the numbers are just up because of so many things, but we are doing a lot of things to try to mediate that, between expanding the facility to meet those needs. We are actually seeking another level of office accreditation.
Right.
So right now the office is accredited by the International Association of Coroners and Medical Examiners, and we're in the process of being audited by the National Association of Medical Examiners, which is a different organization. If that comes through, we'd be only one of 3 coroners offices in the country to have dual certification and accreditation like that. And I think what that says to citizens is that it should give them confidence that we know what we're doing, and we know how to take care of their loved ones, and are up to par on policies and procedures and forensic science and all of those things. And so that's been a big need. We also got some funding this year from the CDC Foundation. We got a 5-year cooperative grant for $1 million. And that was to do a regional project on how we investigate the deaths of children. And this provided us an opportunity to continue to improve the way that we investigate, but also expand those services to include some genetic testing and some advanced investigative stuff that we didn't have funding for, but was really important to families. And that project is regional. So we started in Charleston, and in year 2, which is coming up, we start to work with our neighbors, and we start to help them do child death reviews and help them do some additional funding and testing that they don't have funding for either. And so hopefully that helps us with our children and what's happening to our children.
So how many children have actually died this year in Charleston County?
More than I'd probably like to admit. I don't know the exact number on the top of my head, Quintin, but what we're really seeing with kids is unsafe sleep settings.
Oh.
A lot of co-sleeping or bed sharing, sometimes that is called, and that's really dangerous. And mommies and daddies oftentimes think they're doing the right thing. They think they're making babies comfortable, and they're putting them really in sort of a death trap, if you will. And whether they don't have the ability to roll or sit up and get out of a bad position. And so, unfortunately, we see that a fair amount. We try to do as much education as we can. We work with the Medical University and their Safe Sleep Kids program and try to get the word out. But sometimes we have children that pass away from something that we can't identify. And it's not a safe sleep problem. We don't see anything obvious on autopsy. And this is where the genetic testing comes to play.
Wow.
Because we can test them to see if maybe they might have had a seizure of some kind, and they may have a genetic disposition for epilepsy, for example. Or they may have a genetic issue that we can see cardiac genetic deficiency of some kind. And that's really important for families and communities because they have other children. They have other people that maybe need to know that that is the problem. And so the more information we can give them, the better. So again, we're only in year 1 for this. It's a 5-year project, but we're really excited to see what comes of it. I think it's going to have some amazing research and amazing results.
Now, let me ask you this. What trends is your office actually seeing when it comes to children's deaths here in Charleston County?
Yeah, the safe sleep is probably the main one that we're seeing.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the number one. Now, as we get into older kids, that's where we get into sometimes traffic fatalities, our gun violence issues. We see with some of our young folks, especially those 17-year-olds. But the biggest number is probably in the safe sleep area.
Wow. Now, besides obviously children's deaths, you obviously had other fatalities, including homicides, suicides, accidents, unknown causes. So, which one was the biggest in Charleston County in 2023?
Well, the biggest number is always our natural deaths. That's the biggest number by far, because all kinds of things get reported to us. But accidents by far is the highest, and that would be the drug overdoses is huge. We also have a lot of accidents related to falls. So we have a lot of our older population. They may
Yes.
slip and fall and break their hip, for example, and that hip fracture often contributes to their death. And that's a pretty important thing that we recognize, because as we make that correction on their death certificate, if their family has an accidental life insurance policy, for example, then they're going to get that life insurance. If we didn't investigate that fall and how they tripped or fell or slipped out of bed or whatever that might be, and we don't mark it correctly, then that family doesn't get those benefits should they have a policy like that. So that's another big area for us is falls of our older population.
Now, with those natural causes, Bobby Joe, what was that an increase of what? From what year?
It increases every year, unfortunately, because our population's increased,
Yes.
and more cases are getting referred to us. So,
Wow.
if somebody dies in the hospital, but they've been there less than 24 hours, they have to report that to our office. And so we're going to track that and make sure that everything's okay, the death certificate's right, those kinds of things. But, as our population increases, which is why we need to expand a facility, which is why we need to make sure that we're up to accreditation standards, is that Charleston's not going to get smaller. It's just going to keep getting bigger, because everyone wants to live here, and that's okay. We're ready.
Now, how many of those referrals were, the biggest for your office this past year?
Yeah, well, we get a lot from the medical university,
Mm.
the Roper Hospital System. We get a lot of referrals to. We also get referrals from families who have individuals who maybe have died in a nursing home. So this past year, we had a couple of nursing home deaths that we investigated pretty thoroughly and found some serious problems. And when we do that, we report those. So we report those to the state so that they can come and inspect those facilities. And sometimes we help them inspect them because we see things that we realize are not okay. Those are the kind of cases that don't actually make the news. Another sort of example is medical malpractice cases. We will see situations where someone has passed away after a medical procedure, and sometimes that happens. There are things that go wrong. But I know this year we had one that was egregious. And I worked a lot with the state and the Department of Labor Licensing and Regulation in order to remove a physician's license. That person did not need to be taking care of anybody anymore. And that's a place that we can speak loudly for that person who died, because again, we're their voice.
Right.
And so that individual, we spoke very loudly to make sure that didn't happen to anybody else. I can't do anything to bring her back.
Right.
But what we can do is make sure we investigated it well. We had everything documented, and I'm really glad that LOR acted, and that hopefully won't happen to somebody else.
And I got two more questions for you, Coroner. But how many of those investigations have you all been, sent as far as referrals sent to you all?
Oh, thousands. We get thousands of referrals every year. I think our total probably is about 4,000 between death calls and then also all the requests for cremation authorization.
Yes.
So we're, for those who don't know how that works, if you want to have your loved one cremated, before that happens, you have to get a permit from the coroner's office. And that is to make sure that nobody is cremated before we have a chance to investigate.
Mm.
And so those numbers have skyrocketed over the years because more and more families are opting for cremation as opposed to burial.
Wow.
And so those numbers have risen, but those are also referred to us. And oftentimes we catch things. We catch a death that needed to be reported.
And how many did that happen in this year?
I think we're almost about 3,000 if my count is right. I'd have to check the system,
Sure.
But we, it's a huge aspect of what we do. And I would say we did a little study a couple of years ago to kind of figure out how many of the cases that were referred to us were actually not correctly certified and we needed to do something. And we were at about 10%, which is pretty significant when you realize that there were errors. We needed to fix them. We needed to pull somebody back for autopsy. We needed to add that it was an accident related to the fall for someone where they said it was the hip fracture, but it wasn't listed as an accident, and we correct those. So that's a pretty high number of corrections that we're making.
Wow. Oh, now, did you have any partial autopsies this year conducted?
No, we really don't do partials very much.
Mm.
We prefer to, if we're going to do a full autopsy or an autopsy, we're going to do it full. A partial autopsy equals partial results. And so if we are going to do that, we would prefer to do the full autopsy.
Now,
Make sure we're not missing anything.
oh, absolutely, absolutely. I was just thinking this too, Coroner, but how many of the bodies were actually transported to the Charleston County morgue by your coroner's office staff?
Oh gosh, you're asking me specifics. I don't know. A lot. That from an autopsy perspective, we were about 700, but that's not just. Those are just autopsies. That's not those that are coming to us also for storage.
Right.
So sometimes we have individuals that are transported to us, but we don't have family, or the family doesn't have the means and hasn't chosen a funeral home, and so they are in our facility with us until we can make arrangements or help them get them to their final resting place. Unfortunately, we end up holding many for quite some time. Sometimes we have them over a period of time because we can't find family. Or we find family and they don't want to claim their loved one for whatever reason. And so there's a process we have to go through with probate court in order to try to take care of them. And so sometimes we end up holding folks long term. Usually we have them out within a couple months if we can, but sometimes we can't. And we just do the best we can as we try to locate folks.
So, well, let me continue with that. So when that situation happens, how many of those people are actually ended up being cremated versus actually having a proper burial?
Yeah, if the coroner's office is involved, we cremate. We do not bury anyone unless they're unidentified. I mean, that is if they're identified. And we go through a process and have them cremated. And then they remain in our custody until we can find someone that we can turn those cremains over to. Another interesting thing we did this term was Charleston County has a Potter's Field. I don't know if everybody knows that out on Johns Island.
I read that.
Yes, and what's interesting is, I've been in the office forever, and I had never been out to this piece of property. I knew it existed. It had not been used since I think 2005 when Susan Tuning, the coroner then, buried some cremains out there. And so about a year into my term, I was contacted by the county and they wanted to know if they could go and clean up the property. And I said, wait a minute, hold on. Let me make sure I'm doing everything appropriately here. And what I did is I had them hauled. And I actually went out to the property with an archaeologist and an anthropologist and decided that we needed to do ground penetrating radar and document the property. That's historic property. It was a burial ground for those who were indigent and those who maybe didn't have family or resources. And it's sacred ground out there. And so I hired Brockington and Associates that came and helped us make sure we document it well. And we're now in the process of kind of figuring out what we're going to do next. And nobody thinks of the coroner having a cemetery. I didn't know I was going to have to manage a cemetery, but it's been really an honor. I think the way that we take care of those who have left us speaks a lot about us. And so it's been great to take care of that property and make sure those folks are cared for appropriately.
Now, how many people are in that particular cemetery right now?
Well, when we did the diagramming from Brockington Associates, they found what they think are probably about 100 graves that are probably not marked. Nothing's marked out there.
Right.
There are a lot of depressions that they think maybe have been grave sites. We did some interviews with some of the older funeral homes that used to bury individuals out there. The record keeping back then was really poor. So we don't know who's there. I don't know who's buried there. Don't have really, those records would be estate archives and be very hard to find.
Right.
But we estimate that there's at least 100 that are buried out there. And so at some point we want to mark that appropriately and make sure that families know they can go there if they want to go there. And I'm proud of the work that we did out there taking care of that property.
Now, once that property is refurbished, Coroner, now will you actually bury more people there in the future?
Yeah. That's really been in discussion, and I
Wow.
don't think so. I think the cremains that we have, we would rather put them in some type of crypt or something that we can have access to them as opposed to burying them. Because if we have families that come forward and we find them, then we have to go through that process of reinterring them. I think we're better to leave the ground sacred as it is and mark it appropriately, and then have a better way to make sure we can give cremains back to families. But we're still looking at it. I mean, and it's also surrounded by a community.
Right.
And so we want to be respectful of the community. The community was not expecting that they had a cemetery next to them. I don't think. I don't know. But we want to be respectful of how we handle that, not only for those who are buried there, but for those who are living around that community. So it's a consideration of both.
And actually, have you all had a conversation with the community about this property?
Yeah, well, we went and talked to different folks that are right there around the neighborhood because they actually had concerns because it had been overgrown, and so now I think they're much happier because it's cleaned up. I have talked to a couple of churches on the Johns Island area who have an interest in certainly helping maintain it. Joe Boykin, who's the councilman out there right now, came out to the property with me and walked around and kind of talked through what we could do. And because it's in their home, it's there in their home. So there's a lot of considerations on how you take care of it correctly. And right now we've done everything we can do to make sure we document it and care for it. And now it's the next phase of sort of planning. And we'll see. We'll take a little more time and think about it and make the right decisions.
And who else would help you all maintain it besides the community and the churches you just mentioned?
Yeah, Charleston County. Charleston County would help maintain it. I think they have a plan of actually putting it on, Trident United Way has work days, and
Yes.
Charleston County employees often volunteer for those. And so they've considered making that one of the projects, to go out and plant flowers and, make it a respectful place that people want to go. And so
Yes.
I think Charleston County is going to do part of that as well.
Charleston County Coroner Bobbi Joe O'Neill, thank you for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups, sponsored by the Pepper Law Firm.
Thank you so much. It's good to talk to you, Quintin.
Likewise.
And I hope to be able to serve for another 4 years. So thank you so much.
Thank you.